The president says, yeah, it was his idea, tweeting that he was giving and is continuing to give strong consideration to placing illegals in sanctuary cities. The former Republican governor of Wisconsin joins us right now, Scott Walker. Governor, good to have you.
Great to be back. Thanks for having me on, Neil.
Thank you, Governor. What do you think of the president's idea?
You'll see the story. I was trying to...
Well, I think he's just trying to draw attention to the fact just how serious this crisis is at the border. I mean, my goodness, you even had Barack Obama's former Secretary of Homeland Security acknowledging that is a humanitarian crisis. But I think in different parts of the country, people don't fully appreciate just what a big deal this is. And particularly when it comes to the border, you're talking about not just immigration, you're really talking about trafficking of humans, trafficking of firearms, trafficking of drugs. Those are things that are infesting all parts of America, not just those states adjoining the southern border.
So you don't think he was calling their bluff?
Well, I think that's just it. I mean, in the past, I remember years ago when we were pushing, when I was a lawmaker a long time ago, we pointed out as a matter of an argument that we were trying to figure out what to do with perennial sex offenders, and there were some people that wanted to let them out in the communities. We said, well, why don't we put them in the neighborhoods where those people who are advocating for that? Now, obviously, we didn't go do that, but it was to make a point that people say, well, it's not an issue when it's not in their own backyard. The fact of the matter is, if we don't do something about this crisis, it's going to continue to be a problem in Milwaukee, in every urban area, in fact, increasingly in suburban and rural areas. You look at the drug problems alone, those are issues that are happening by and large through our southern border. This is something that isn't new. It's just we finally have a president who's willing to do more than just talk about it, but do something about it.
You know, well, I've got your governor. It's interesting. No one really expected that Donald Trump would carry Wisconsin. You campaigned very hard for him. Obviously, the president did as well. He won by 23,000 votes over Hillary Clinton, over, I think, close to 3 million cast. Do you think he could do that again, or are polls different now?
Well, I think it's going to be incredibly difficult. It was a combination of Donald Trump, then candidate, was really speaking to a lot of people who felt forgotten by Washington, the forgotten men and women of our state and all throughout the Midwest, and for that matter, across the country. Combined with the fact that Hillary Clinton, you might remember, after she lost the primary in Wisconsin, never came back. I believe she didn't come back to Michigan either. And people in the Midwest in particular, they actually want to be treated well. They want the candidates to come out and reach out and talk to them. The Democrats aren't going to make that mistake again. But I think if this race is a difference between more freedom and more prosperity versus less, and that's what you get with a socialist agenda, whether it's Bernie Sanders or any of the others talking out there, they're moving further and further to the left. I think if people realize we don't want to be like Venezuela, we want to be like America. And I think that's a message that can carry the state and carry the country.
You know, you mentioned about what's going on in the Midwest as well, and the states that the president won. A little over 70,000 votes, I believe, tipped the electoral math in his favor by winning states like Ohio and Pennsylvania, and, of course, your fine state, what have you. Other polls seem to say the president is, at best, competitive, if not losing in those states. I don't know where he would gain ground elsewhere, but also to your point, I mean, it depends on who the Democrats nominate, but they're going to virtually live in those electoral battleground states. Do you think the president should as well?
Oh, yeah, and he's been here, he's been in Michigan, he's been all throughout the Midwest. When you look at what he's done for dairy farmers, what he's done for workers at manufacturing companies, what he's done for taxes. I mean, the average family in our state, 2 parents working, 2 kids at home, saves over $2,500 because of his tax cut. We don't nearly talk enough about that. But I also think, the more people know about whomever the Democrats nominate, and they're going to have their convention right here in Milwaukee next summer. To me, obviously they're not going to do this, but their best strategy would be not to tell us who their nominee is until a week before the election, because the more we know about that person, him or her, the more concerns I think Americans are going to have, and I think that's where the race tightens up.
And that's depending whether they, get to Wisconsin and they have a nominee. The reason why I'm dwelling on this, and maybe a bit too much, Governor, I apologize, is that the irony could be that the Electoral College at least provides a way for candidates to visit these battleground and other states, small states, rather than if it were, a popular vote, they would live, if you're a Democrat in California or New York, if you're a Republican in Texas or elsewhere. And I'm wondering if the irony is just that they might now just camp out, both candidates, in states like yours.
Oh, I think there's no doubt about it. You look at the Midwest, the path to the presidency in 2020 is clearly through states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Iowa, Ohio. There's a few other outliers. Florida certainly is going to be in the mix. But those are going to be the key battleground states. And again, I think the contrast has got to be, freedom, free enterprise, more freedom, more prosperity for Americans. It's why I've been speaking out, for example, on this whole talk about 5G and nationalizing the system, which I think would be a huge mistake, not only on policy, but politically. We should be contrasting things between we don't want to be like China, we don't want to be like Venezuela, we don't want to be like places that have failed, we want to be like America. And I think the president was right all the way back in the State of the Union address when he said we were born free, we will always be free, America will never be a socialist country. Bernie Sanders and the long, long list of others trying to replicate his agenda, I want to push America in a socialist agenda. That promises prosperity but leads to poverty. We've got a real plan to get people working again, and it's working here in Wisconsin, across the country.